All right. So the topic for today is basically Azure API management. Of course, the core is in API management, and we are going to see what Azure as a flavor offers to the actual functionality of API management. In terms of agenda, we wanted to look at what API management is, what Azure API management means, right? What is the offering that Azure has for it? What are the business values that the API management is going to help us deliver? What is the value in it from a developer perspective? And the core concepts around it, it would be followed by, or a bunch of the core concepts would also be associated with a demo to it. So if you look at it, the objective of the session is not to go too deep vertically into API management, trying to solve complex scenarios. The objective is to more to look at the use cases of API management in its broader perspective. What are the different ways in which it could help us deliver those business values? I just wanted to ensure that I set the stage right in terms of the expectation. So it's an age-old question. Anytime when we pick up something, it's going to be the what and whys and hows of why we are doing it, or what is it that we are doing, right? We have the APIs have been in the market since time immemorial, right? Like for a long time, we have been doing UIs, APIs, databases. There have been umpteen tools that has helped us to kind of test the APIs. There have been different standards of documentation for the APIs, and then there have been tools that have been oriented towards providing a technical specification for the API, like Open API, and trying to build documentation around it. There have been umpteen different tools that have been trying to do all this. API management just tries to consolidate the best of different necessities that was there in the API world. So it just creates a way for you to design, publish, document, analyze, and you do all this in a more secure and a scalable environment so that as a business, you would be able to monetize and provide value to the customer. And the next question becomes, all right, so can I do this without API management? Yes, you can use 5 different tools. Without API management, the same things can be accomplished by using 5 different tools. But it is an, let's call it, a big encompassing umbrella, which kind of helps you do all at one shot, providing you different controls and different accesses by which you'll be able to do a bunch of security and redundant developer tasks to be automated. That's the goal of API management. And when we start with it, when let's say that as an organization, if I want to adopt API management, my question would be like, first, why should I even do it? I have my team, I have the team generating APIs, I have another team that is consuming those UIs, and everything is working fine. I have no other necessity. That was the world that we were in. But now, with the ever increasing amount of businesses and the technologies and advancements that come every day, integration, for instance, has become a necessity. Like, is there any product that you can name which is which can just stay standalone in an enterprise today without having to integrate with some other component? Anything? Anyone? I cannot think of one. So you in fact, the business of integration is so big that you get a market advantage if I'm able to integrate to the top 5 vendors versus the top 2 vendors. That becomes a differentiating factor in a lot of cases. So it has become a strategic necessity for any of these organizations to be able to expose their APIs so that they become integratable by the other complementary systems. And by doing that, I increase my value of being able to sell and reach multiple other customers. Because for any use case or for any problem, we have umpteen products out there to solve it. And there is no one tool which kind of solves a business problem in its entirety from its end to end. So for a problem, you have multiple tools that needs to play together. That is why API management or exposure of APIs and having the ability to manage it is becoming a, let's call it, big topic and a big business. Does it set the stage for what and why we want to go in for API management? Oops, not this. So from a business value, if we look at it, there are more such items of value to us, but I've just tried to list down the top 8 or 9 over here, right? First thing is about the digital transformation. We all know that is, or we are very fastly evolving into the world of digital transformation. As we can see that to Kara's words, there is a very strong strategic and design aspect from Concentrix or from any other consulting company to be to help clients or enable companies to be able to transform their businesses into a total digital outlook. So by ensuring that I'm able to share my data, which is a digital data, out there, it helps me in making myself it helps me in making or positioning myself to be able to transform into a successful business model. When it comes to the reason for why I would go in for a digital transformation is more about monetization, right? At the end of the day, if I'm going to invest on something, I want to have a return on it. So I would want to monetize this. It provides opportunity for a bunch of SaaS products to be able to monetize. For example, weather.com or any SaaS product that provides you, let's say, game updates, cricket scores, right? All of them that a lot of times we consume for free also have a monetized version of it behind the scenes, which would be used by umpteen other players to create a business or generate an idea and create a business model out of it. That's the aspect of monetization. I have the wealth of data. For example, I am a company that stores, let's say, follows cricket matches, and I keep track of scores and everything. That's the data that I have. But how do I put this data and convert it to money? I build APIs around it. I expose this data as APIs, and I tell to people that I have different packages. I can give you the data at different rates, at different speeds, based on which I'll be able to monetize that product. That's the monetization aspect of it is. The third one is the customer experience. Now, let's think about, let's say, an ERP system. If I am the customer for an ERP system, I would definitely want my system to be integratable to, let's say, I have another billing system or a taxation system or some other system, right? I want my system to be integratable to all this. As an SRP, as an ERP company, when I go and sell this, I want to ensure that I provide the best experience to the customer by providing him with easy plug and play multiple options, right? So that's the customer experience part of it. The accelerated time to market is more about uh, I would be able to connect to it better as I go through the internals of what the APIM does. But at a high level, APIM enables us to work or transform or rewire your architecture, your backend, and everything in a way without having much impact to the customers. You abstract your customers with your ongoing work, thereby enabling you to make changes quite fastly, quickly, without disrupting your business. Enhanced partner ecosystems is what we saw. As we quoted on the example of customer experience, enhanced partner ecosystem is you are able to build it by means of exposing these APIs. And how does this increase your operational efficiency? The API management as a practice brings in standards and principles that the different developer teams would have to adhere. So now in any product, when there are multiple teams, silo teams, they would have their own standards, their own practices. And when you want these two features to integrate and interact with each other, you would have to write a layer of adapter in between to be able for these two to speak to each other. With APIM, you create a standard. You create a generic standard which all different teams would adhere to, so that it is very easy for them to integrate and interact. An example of that in a non-APIM world will be the CTS that was published with .NET, right? What is the common type specification? It's just that it says, if you want to write an API, if you want to expose something, write it in CTS so that I'll be able to upgrade and plug it to any of the different .NET Core or .NET Framework or all those different components. That is the type of discipline that APIM brings in from an API perspective. So it provides and ensures that people follow the standard. Scalability and flexibility. Yes, now you have exposed your APIs. I can expose it to one customer. I can expose it to 10 customers pretty quick because I have the data. I have a way of exposing the data. It's just a plug and play model from this point in time. That's the part of scalability and flexibility. The data-driven decision making is enabled because with the APIM, I'll be able to understand how many or what is it that my audience or my customers are consuming, because it gives with it the API management as a principle provides a ton of analytics and monitoring as part of it. So we exactly know what are the types of data that the customers are needing, what are the different types of APIs they are consuming, and it goes to the extent of analyzing what are the APIs that are actually consumed in order, which would give an insight into how that data would be consumed by the consumer. And you will be able to write or create APIs that can give this decision at one shot to you. Or you might be able to run algorithms, AI algorithms on your data based on understanding what the customer is expecting from those different APIs. And you would be able to differentiate yourself and position yourself differently in the market because you are able to provide value added or AI added inferences and data. The last one is about compliance and risk mitigation. It's a common one. We all know we expose data, so we want to ensure that we mitigate data leaks, we mitigate the risk, and there would be a lot of compliance principles that will have to be adhered to in terms of each one of these APIs or any of the data that is being exposed. Because you centralize your APIs into one place, putting in the compliance or putting in the risk mitigation factors, applying those becomes a lot easier. That, in essence, is what APIM offers to the business. To summarize it into a nutshell, it enables a business to monetize, transform, and scale in a very efficient and quick manner. That's the value that APIM offers to business. The reason why we wanted to highlight this is because when we want to go and let's say if we want to implement APIM into each of our projects, the first thing is to ensure that the business is sold on it. We need to tell the business as to what is the offer that this is going to give them, right? That's the purpose of this slide, or as to why or what APIM does to business. Any questions till this point? All right. So when we were touching upon businesses, we also saw some of the places as to how it adds or what is the discipline that it brings because of which it adds value to the business. But it's the same discipline and elimination of redundant tasks, right? These two together are major ones that adds value to the developer. We as developers know that documentation is always a pain, right? I mean, I would write 50 APIs rather than document 5 APIs, right? So we would gladly write 50 APIs rather than documenting 5. We would tell like the first, I'm pretty sure how many of you, frank answers, how many of you tried it here? The moment ChatGPT came in, how many of you felt the need to go and see, hey, are you able to generate documentation for my API? Yep. Most of us would have done it because we know that's the biggest pain. And APIM kind of helps us. It doesn't do the job for us, but it helps us reduce the load, or at least make us feel comfortable doing that job. No, it's still a bitter pill to swallow, but it's just sugar coated and it is given. And it provides your testing and sandbox environments, which makes it easier for you as a developer to play around without disturbing, let's call it, your QA teams or any other existing teams, right? And it provides you, we saw this, the consistent API and design standards. I want to bucket these three into one and tell these are the building blocks of what would be an API first approach in its first place. Why that adds value or how that helps in terms of accelerating and an efficiency, I want to quote it with a story or an example. In a typical workflow, when a request comes in for you to write an API, let's say like what is the first thing that you would want to do? You understand the business and everything. What is the first thing that you would do? Correct. You create a data model or create an API contract, and you would then try to write the API and see if you are able to get the data as per the data model, and then you publish the API. It is from this point onwards that the other teams start interacting with it. A UI team start interacting with it at this point. The QA team has to write test cases or test cases surrounding it, and they start doing it at this point. Let's take a reverse approach. In a code first, in an API first approach, what do? We design, and I don't write a single line of code, right? We design and publish the contract alone out in a centralized place with an approval workflow so that this is designatedly published. The moment that happens, all the different teams can now start working in parallel. I would go ahead and start writing the API to that model. There are ways by which API management enables mocking it, so the UI teams can actually start writing their own functionality written to the mock API. The testing team, let's say I have an automated testing and some manual testing, whatever combination it might be, they can in parallel write their test cases or write their automation test scripts, all pointed to the same model. What helps us do that? The contract, which is built on a foundation of a specification. Those are the two major tools that enables us to be able to parallelize this work. And that is how the efficiency or operational efficiency, accelerated time to market, all this kind of comes to fore. Moving on to the next parts, the next 2, 3, 4, or 5 parts, I would say are the most redundant work that everybody keeps doing on their day-to-day life. Every time you want to build a web application or a mobile application or anything, I need authentication, I need authorization, and then whenever I build something, I need to have monitoring over it, I need to have analytics over it, I need to have error handling, I need to have logging, right? It's a package that these parts is a common package, irrespective of whenever you create any API, right? As an organization, if I have 20 different teams churning out APIs for 20 different functionalities, they would all actually implement all of these principles. Maybe the other way is you will have one team implementing it across all these principles and then other teams borrowing from it. That's the other model in which companies operate. But in any case, these are all pretty much, it's the same wheel of the cycle, right? Everybody, we have done it over the years for a lot of time, and we still take and copy and use that same code and do it again. APIM packages all these things in a very easily pluggable way so that you do it once and you do it very quickly with very low code to no code. You kind of do it and that's it. You set that in motion. The next one is about versioning. Because we are talking about API, we cannot leave versioning aside because that's the constant challenge of any API development team, especially the ones that are interacting with native or mobile apps, because the mobile apps are out there. it is in my phone, and it is my prerogative to update the app or not. I may choose not to update. So the biggest challenge that most API teams face when working with mobile apps is that, hey, my your new API will not be compatible with the already released apps. I still have 2% of the users still using that older app, right? So now, because of that 2%, I am not able to get the best model or the best contract or the best fit for my domain. I'm locked. But versioning solves that, and API management provides us a lot of ways by which we are able to document, discover, and publish the versioning aspects as well, enabling our customers to leverage our latest and greatest versions. I would come to the policy enforcement a bit later. Integration capabilities is about me as API management. I I have zero business knowledge. I am not the API. I am just a gateway for the API. I am not the API in itself, which means I need to be able to seamlessly integrate with some item or something that will be able to actually serve the responses, serve the API. So the integration capabilities become a must for the APIM, and most of the APM systems out there comes with very seamless, amazing plug and play model of integration, so that you are able to do some transformations here, and you are able to hand it over to the backend. The policy enforcement is again on an API. Apart from the authentication, authorization, and all that, there are some tasks that are very redundant in nature or very needed in nature. Still, you have systems which accept a response only in XML, and you will have 10 customers who have it in JSON. Converting that JSON to XML is a task, right? I want to cache my response. I want to parse my response. I want to make some changes to the response before it reaches the backend. These are all different use cases that comes to any API development team on a day-to-day basis. Policy enforcement is a way by which it enables us to do all that in a very seamless, clear, and concise way, and you do it at one place, and that's it. You don't have to do it at 10 different places. The last one, self-service developer portal. It kind of takes the documentation to a totally different plane. What I mean by that is, we spoke about how difficult or how painful it is for us to document stuff. What if I ask you, right, as an API team, I tell you like, hey, because we are a SaaS product, I want you to actually create a portal which other users or customers who wants, they can sign in, play around, understand what our API does and all that, right? What would be your response? You are not writing an API. You have to just build a website to just publish or tell to others what your API does. The developer portal is, think of it like you have a content management system in which you're just going to go double click, type stuff, do some stuff about it, and you have the sign in ability and the ability to see it, all that built in, and it is handed over to you, right? That's what a self-service developer portal is. Just we can see that last aspect as to how much of a value it can add to a developer's morale, because now he's working with real business problems rather than working on the mundane website creation or authentication of a user there and all that, right? So that's the value of having the self-service developer portal. Any questions in terms of business or developer values? No, I have not done SOC auditing on it, and I'm not sure. I mean, to my understanding, the policy enforcement will not help us to. You can perform the audit by looking at the logs at an API level. That can be done, but enforcing it as a policy, like audit, is something that you do posthumously, right? For policy enforcement is more for me to do things on the fly, live on the wire, as things come and go. For example, you have a SOC policy that you want to enforce. That is absolutely possible using policy enforcement. We can definitely do that. We have some samples. Of course, these samples that I have or demos that I have deals with existing policy snippets that Azure gives, but we can write our own custom snippets as well. All right. So this is just a snapshot view of what Azure APIM is. Forget the text. We all know that it's the fully managed service, right? But these are the basic building blocks of an APIM. In fact, the core of APIM is in these two boxes, the data plane and the management plane. So the diagram is pretty self-explanatory. You can have multiple app developers trying to consume what you publish using the developer portal, and you have a bunch of API providers who are interacting with the management plane, and a bunch of services who are interacting with the gateway. Let's understand what these two means in very simplistic terms, right? We all know what a gateway is. That's the crux by which the abstraction is even created. How do I abstract all my backend away from my consumer? It is using the gateway. That provides me that ability. So I can make changes to my backend as and how I feel fit. My business model might increase. I might have 10 downstream services or downstream teams that come. So I would want to add the capability for all of them. So I would want to revisit and remodel my backend. I can do all that with liberty because the gateway has abstracted all that from the end-facing clients. As long as I maintain the contract that goes out of this gateway, I'm good to do anything else. Now, this data plane here is more about controlling what happens to the data that goes in and comes back. The gateway tells what is the backend service that it has to reach out for this incoming request. Every incoming request goes through this gateway. It can be a custom gateway or it can be a default gateway that is provided. But there you tell which backend I need to reach. I can have 3 different backends as well here. And I can write rules on the gateway to tell to route each of those to different backends. And when I get the response, I will be writing the rules to tell what transformation or what is it that needs to be applied on this before I get that out. So a simple way that I tend to remember this is anything that I do with the API data or anything I want to do with the API data, send it, get it back, do transformations, any of that, data plane is responsible to do that. I have controls. When we look at the demo, we will see what are the features of the data plane, but I have a bunch of built-in controls that helps me do all that. Now, let's go to what a management plane is. I do all this on the API and I interact with the backend. But let's say I publish a product or I publish an API as a product, and I tell I'm a SaaS provider, so I will have a basic pack and a advanced pack. And I tell a basic pack can hit this 50 times a day, an advanced pack can hit this 500 times a day, right? Because I'm charging based on that. These are all management rules, or these are all rules that I would have to write to see how my infrastructure and API can be managed, right? And I can tell that there would be times when, let's say, one of the customers is hit by a cyber attack and the key is compromised, right? I don't want the attacker to be able to send requests to my side because I want to secure mine, right? All such activities, which are more about access controls, management, throttling, and all that, that is an aspect of the management plane. It's a place where you manage the access of your APIs and manage your APIs as a whole, grouping my APIs or slotting my APIs into different groups, providing different access control to different groups of APIs, right? All those different aspects are managed in the management plane. We will see examples of what each of them is as we go through the demo, but in a easy to remember way, anything that affects the data of the API will be done by the data plane. Anything that relates to Management of the APIs, grouping, slicing, dicing, access control, all that will fall under the management plane. Now, the user plane is pretty self-explanatory. Any developer who wants to access will be consuming it from the developer port. Because Azure APM gives me these three planes, it reduces a lot of overhead from my side because I no longer have to work on each one of these separately. I have built-in tools to do that for me. That's the advantage. And you can see in the diagram the different integrations that Azure APM has in terms of the backend services, in terms of the different structures, and in terms of the multitude of logging and analytics related items, right? App insights, Azure monitor, networking aspects, recovery walls, storage, it's all there. It's all seamlessly built in. So this is basically to show the amount of different use cases you would be able to leverage out of APIM because it has been fully integrated into Azure's ecosystem. There are multiple use cases that can be leveraged out of it and multiple security principles that can be put into its places. Any questions on this? All right. So let's look at what some of the core concepts is. And I think after this, it's more about the demo. All these core concepts, we will put it into practice and we will see how it actually does it, right? Okay. So we know what an API is. In Azure APIs world, an API is a group. It's like a parent. Inside that doesn't provide any data or anything by itself. Multiple operations are grouped inside an API. Think of the API to be like an entity, right? Or a feature. User might be an API. And then you will have operations like user create, user update, user delete, and all those. They are the different operations that you would perform on that entity or a feature. Product is providing you with a more logical way of grouping things together. I might have, let's say, a user and a user profile. These two are more logical in nature. I would so the product allows me a way of grouping this logically into one group and applying policies and principles over this or access restrictions over this group as a whole. In more simpler terms, having multiple VMs, having one network security group and applying policy on that network security group, that's what a product is. It enables you to group things together into one and apply access restrictions and everything over that one single level. It is so powerful that is one of the biggest aspect that actually enables monetization. For example, the things that we spoke about, let's say providing a basic pack, advanced pack, starter pack, right, pro pack. Those are all things that would be actually done by or that could be done using the concept of product. Those features that are utilizable by a user in the starter pack alone will be mapped to a product called starter. Those features that can be done by an advanced user as well will be mapped to a product called advanced. So now, unless and until I am subscribed to that pack, I will not be able to even use those APIs or call those APIs, even from a front end perspective, right? That's the power of product. Subscription is more about, in its simplistic terms, it's like giving you a key. Any subscription that we get, right? Any Netflix or anything, right? It's basically they give a key using which I can open and use that anytime. By having a Netflix subscription, by signing into a Netflix subscription, I can open Netflix and watch movies. Similarly, subscription is a key that gives you access to the APIs behind it. Policies. There are a lot of policies. For example, caching, varying by content, uh, validating the content size, validating the structure that response structure that goes out, validating the request structure that comes in. There are all these different policies that could be applied, but it's a very important concept because that is how we are able to accelerate our time to market, and that is how it adds value by eliminating the redundant work to be done by the developers. We saw about what gateway is, we saw what backend services is, we know what analytics and monitoring is. It might be better to actually see that as we go through it. And we will also have a look at what we understood what a developer portal is, and we understood from the previous picture that it has integration with a lot of Azure services. So the new terminologies that are introduced in this slide is basically about the first four: the API, operation, product, and subscription. Rest of the terminologies are something that we have touched upon in our previous slides. Just wanted to be clear on that. So any questions, or can we move forward? All right. So now let's do a demo. Let's first create an API management, and let's create an API, create an operation, import, mock response, right? We will get to the actionable part of it. I don't know, I'm not able to move that pin. Okay. So I'm sharing it, but I don't know how to just move. Yeah. Alrighty. So I have a subscription and I have a resource group. So the prerequisites for creating a APIM are going to be this. We will go through the process of creating, or what are the steps or what are the details it asks for in terms of trying to create it, but we won't create that as is because, I mean, creation of that takes sometimes 10 to 20 minutes. Probably we can finish our dinners and come back. So in the interest of time, we would not be going ahead to do that. So you create a resource group and then you give a name, right? Or and then oops, API name. Organization name, you can have it something or anything, and then you give a email ID. Now there are different pricing tiers. For the benefit of our demo, we will go with developer. The consumption is a tier where you have very limited features. Developer provides you almost all the features as a premium, except for the fact that it just doesn't have any SLA, so that you can experience all those different features, but it doesn't make sense to put it into a production. All the other ones are more about providing you the ability to scale the units, how much you can scale, and what is the expected SLA on that. That is where the difference is in terms of the different plans. Now I can tell that I want to get it to an application insight. So I need to have an application insights instance created. So I have one. Then I can put, if I'm not in development or conception tiers, I can tell how many scale units I need. One scale unit corresponds to how many requests the API management service can handle in parallel. That's what a scale unit means. If I want my APM to have managed identity so that it can be granted access to other multiple Azure resources that I have, I can enable that here. And let's say I am an enterprise where I want to be very secure. I have a lot of compliance and data access restrictions. So I want to put my Azure APM into a virtual network or make it as a private endpoint. So it is not, let's say, publicly accessible by others, right? I can have an APIM, which is more for just my internal company operations and not publicly exposed as well. it gives you the ability to do it. You can see if you go in, it's about mapping it to that specific virtual network subnet and all that. The next one is in, yeah.
About a month in integration. So they added like an in preview standard V2, which now lets you potentially do it for pennies compared to the premium model, but it's not available in every region yet.
Yep, that is true. Thank you. Thanks much for adding that. So that's a major differentiating factor. And to your point, some of these features gets added in a very frequent basis. There is a workspace preview which I have not yet explored, but I know that there is a preview. I have not yet explored that, but I see that it is getting added on a quite frequent basis. Okay, I have to select none. It, you can tell what protocols, what cipher I would be accepting right at the API management layer. Anything that is not applicable, I'm not going to accept is also something that you can specify here. If you don't do it here, there are ways in which you can also specify it after you instantiate the APIM. So that is not a big deal. And after all this, you would go and then you can review and install. But just in the interest of time, I already have one created for this. I have one here, which is for, let's say, my reference purposes. You know, I'm writing an open book test here, so I can always refer back, copy things from here. But this is the one that's been created for our demo purposes. So without much ado, let's try to go into APIs. By default, when you create one, you get a standard or you get one API exposed out by default, which is the Eco API. You also have multiple operations on that, and you can see the different policies. So this is the API where I'm grouping all the operations on one as one, right? And these are all the different operations on it. And you can see that if I click one, I can actually specify my request, response, everything over here. If I'm designing my API, right here, I can specify my request or how I want what are the things that I want my content to have. How should be my response? How should my response be? And what is the status I want to send out on receiving a certain response? All that can actually be stated right here. And if I want to add any policy, you can see here JSON to XML, which means my backend is only going to accept XMLs. So the incoming one, I do a JSON to XML conversion, and then I send it to backend, have that processed, and I send it back. Now, I can go to this setting and I can tell what URL scheme, whether I need to use a subscription key, all that. It also provides you an ability to test this. Let's do a quick test here, right? We run this and then we see we get the output as XML. Why? Because we transformed the JSON. You can see the input is actually a JSON, but the output is XML. Why? Because we transformed the JSON to XML while sending into the backend, but we never transformed it on its way back out, right? So now to see what difference it makes, right? We will just test it from a Postman client. It's a post request. Let's take the body. So let's take a guess. When I send it, what do we think will be the response that we will get? Nope. Pass the subscription key. Now, there are two ways. I can pass the subscription key, or I come here and I remove the requirement. The other interesting question that becomes is, If so, then how did this test pass? Right? When I did this, how did this test pass? There, if you go to this, you don't see anything here. That's because this is where it is actually passed. It's just hidden from us as a user. But whenever we make requests within the test, if a subscription key is required, by default, it is passed as part of the request. And it uses the all privileged administrator key, which we will see it in the subscription section. So now to work around that, either I can pass the subscription key or I tell, hey, I don't need subscription key for this. This is how I enable public free access to any of the APIs that I have. So if I have an API, I want any public person to be accessible, right? I want it to be accessed irrespective of whether you have even signed up or not or subscribed or not, right? This is the way that enables or that lets me do that. Now when I send it, I get the XML back because it is XML, it have all these junk characters, but then this is what it is, right? Now we were able to look at this, save it, go to test, and let's get more easier, right? The subscription key starts with F74. If you go into the subscriptions, you can see that it's that built-in all access subscription. So the all privilege subscription key is what is used internally by the system to actually being able to make all these requests. It was great for us to see all the different ones that they created and gave us for us by default. Let's get to creating one, right? So I'm going to add an API. I'm going to try and copy it from here so that it gets more easier. I forget it. So not my fault. It's portal's bug. Oh well, seriously. Okay. I'm going to add a HTTP API. I can specify a different web service URL if I want to access this if needed here. But otherwise, I'm just going to create it. And then I'm going to go into the operation. I think the operation I had was basically get articles, right? So I will use that same one here. Right? And now I want to go and I want to provide a response to this, right? So if you look at this, I tell that 200, okay. I have to add, I know that it is going to be an application/JSON. And then if I have a definition is basically the contract. If I have a definition, I can very well use it. If not, I can provide a definition name. If I have the output response, by just providing it, it creates the structure by itself. Now, this is something powerful that you can play around. For example, if I need required parameters here, I can add a required tag, and there is a way by which I can tell in my output property, these have to be there, right? We also have an example of that, but let's create one definition of it. Right? So now let's save it. The next thing that we have to do is we are just creating the API, correct? So I don't have any backend associated to it. Let's see what happens if I just go and try to test it now. There is nothing that is available for me to serve this request, right? So what's the quickest thing I can do? Let's look at one of the policies that will actually help us here, right? I have this inbound processing. Let's look at what or how we can do to mock the response, right? Add policy, mock response. This is what we want to give. Let's try to send. This proves out that in reality, if we like how much pain we would have faced when we actually just generate the contract, and then if we want to give some mock responses and mock items to a mobile team and a web team, there are umpteen steps that we would have done. But here, we have not written a single line of code. We have just had the contract. We have generated a contract and we have enabled the mocking and we were able to get it out from the mock. So now I can very well go ahead and expose this API to somebody outside for them to start consuming and writing code against it. Let's say I go here. I need to pass the key because we have not taken that. This will just prove out that passing the key will. Let's say if the key is compromised, right? We just have to deactivate it, which means that the key is wrong. So my security, my access denial, everything is kind of right built into it. I don't have to do anything. It's typically no code for me at this point in time, right? So we created an API. Great. But it is not every time that in an existing application that I would go and create new APIs. The other biggest pain point that we would feel is always about being able to, if I already have a system with 50 APIs, right? I have a .NET 6 web API, Swagger, Spec, everything is good, but there are 50 APIs. What do I do with it, right? I can also import an API from any of these resources if I have. For example, I actually already have a set of APIs that I have published it to a app service. So let's just look at the Swagger for it from the local. It just gets me a bunch of playlists that I have, and if I want to filter by playlist, if I give a specific ID, if it is available, it gets me that playlist. That's all it typically does. This application has been published to an app service called Star Movies Listing. So if you would, if we come here and if I say I want to import it from an API, I first will have to select an app service. This is the app service that I have. I select it. And I have this display name and everything, right? I'm going to probably like, I can change it to anything like this. For example, I want to give a slightly different name, right? Oops. Oh, Give me one moment. I just wanted to redo this. I don't think it created it correctly. In this, there is only right. Okay. So it was able to generate the APIs and it adds the trace by itself. So all that I had there, it is able to generate the operations out here, but it doesn't tie it by itself to the backend because that is something that we will have to do. Now, let's try to just tie it to the backend, right? I think it is get playlist is what I had there. Actually, you know what? Let me just browse one more thing. Okay. I am just not able to understand as to why. Give me a moment. It was supposed to just get those two API. I mean, it is supposed to just import those two APIs alone without importing the other stuff. So this is an app service. Okay, there is something funky that is going on, but we can kind of generate our, or we'll just configure this to kind of hit the backends by ourselves, right? That seems to be more easily doable at this point in time. So I'll just go ahead and add an API to hit it. So I'm going to add an item called get playlist, right? Now I am going to give a response, but I will also be adding a backend to where it should actually go, so that the response, though I add uh, as 1 or 2, I would actually get it. I'd actually get the entire 10 playlists rather than just the 1 or 2. So for a sample, I'm just going to take the first 2 and I'm going to tell here that it's not here. Tell here that it's going to be a so we have it created here. We save it and then we go and tell, okay, what is my backend? It's an HTTPS endpoint. I want to override it with a specific item that I have, right? So I'm going to go here, get this and tell that, hey, whenever I receive a request, this is where I want to go and fetch the data. So I'm going to go here and test it. Okay. Give me a moment. Oops. Yep. Maybe because I already have the get. And what was my backend? I just want because it is case sensitive a lot of times. The L was capital or small. Oops. Hmm. Let's try to test it. Playlist. Let's go to the backend. Oh, this is okay. All right. If this doesn't work, I will just use the existing one because this is pretty much the same setup. Uh, Maybe that S. Okay. Yeah, I understand. The problem is I have appended. Did I add it with playlist here? The backend is just API, right? And then if I go to the route,
Yeah. Get rid of that one. So on the operation that you're creating right now, you add an S on the end of that operation. Yeah, like if you edit that, we yeah.
Yeah. This one.
It looked like when you're hovering over the other one, it kind of
It had playlists. Okay. Nope. I'm pretty sure it is actually just playlist. Yeah, that's okay. I will. Um, so I'll try to continue with this and then come back, right? So here we have the same get playlist, and then I create a definite response called as recording for this. And you can see that there is a definition called recording here. So when I test this, it goes to the backend and it pulls me all the 10 items that I needed. So it is able to get the data from the backend rather than from what was supplied to this here. Because what was supplied to this here, it was just a minimal amount of 2 or 3 IDs, right? So going back to our demo and trying to connect it back, we were able to do these four. We were able to look at these four. Let's look at some of the policy enforcement. In terms of authentication authorization, I would just show how the portal enables us to do it. The policy enforcement is what we will see in the demo. There is also this concept called policy fragments. This is more like how as a developer we write code or utility classes. The policy fragments are your utility policies. You can define that XML structure once and then you can plug it into multiple places. If you want to change it, you change it at that one place and then it kind of gets reflected everywhere. From an authentication and authorization part, subscription key also provides you an amount of authorization because you tell what is the scope here, right? So what I have done here is when we go to products, we'll be able to look at that. But it kind of tells me what is the authorization rules that are applicable. And the protocols and ciphers, as we were creating it, we spoke about the protocols and ciphers are something that can be added later as well, right? So if you look at this, you have your protocols plus ciphers here. It says which ones are enabled and which ones are disabled. So I can go and disable any of the weak protocols and ciphers. If I want to use a certificate based authentication on my APIM. Example, I want to do the certificate validation for my domain right on my APIM layer. But then between my APIM and backend, I don't want to pass the certificate, right? Why verify it twice, which will incur more cycles in terms of response time. So the thought for that is you can include the certificates here. Any of the certificates that you have, you can include it here and have a certificate termination right on your APIM layer so that the calls from the APIM to the backend can be made without an SSL certificate. And in terms of VNet and private endpoints, you can see that here in terms of networking or even when we were creating it, it gave us the ability to connect it to a virtual network or to a private endpoint. Let's look at some of the interesting policies that we have there, right? So in terms of policies, I have a rate limit policy here and I have a validate content policy on the other API. I will show what this means, right? Let's open a policy, let's go to it and then let's look at what it says. I'm telling that my output cannot exceed this payload size. Prevent any output that goes from this if it does not conform to the schema of recording new. Where do I define these schemas is my next question. So you can see a section for schemas here. You can see I have defined a schema for recording new. It is pretty much same as what the recording was, except that there is this added new type here, right? This is an extra property that has been added. So if I go back to this in here, in here, in here, if I test it, so I get it perfectly fine. Now I want to go and modify my schema and tell that one of the properties is a required one. Don't remember the syntax on top of my head, but I'm just think this would be the one. So if my response does not have this string of required new on the API, it is going to fail it for the content. So now let's go back there. Right? It fails it because it doesn't satisfy the response content type, because that parameter has been made or has been called out to be as mandatory. If you want to look more into it, uh, you can actually enable the trace, but for it in the creation in the setting, you will have to enable the trace for it, the diagnostic logs and trace for it. Let's look at another such policy that we have, which is about the rate limit, right? So in this, let's say I have a pack and I don't want it to be hit more than 10 times, right? So I give the number of requests. I tell that in a 50-minute, in a 60-second period, I cannot hit it more than 5 times. Now I'm going back here and I'm going to like hit it once, twice, thrice, four, five. You can see that the sixth time it says that the rate limit is exceeded. One aspect here is there are two concepts here. One is rate limit, the other one is quota limit. These two have a small differentiation. The rate limit is used for something that you want to be something that you want to limit in terms of a short duration within 1 hour, right? Or within 2 hours. Throttling at that rate, at that position is your rate limit. If I want to do it over a period of a month, 100,000 calls in a month, 200,000 calls in a month, that can be accomplished via a concept called quota limit. It works to the same principle, but that's the differentiation between how the rate limit versus quota limit kind of works. So looking back here, we saw some of the policies and how they are being utilized, right? We also looked at rate limiting and throttling. Let's also take a look at the products, because these are the two concepts by which we will be able to monetize it. When you monetize, you don't want to allow more requests in a specific amount of time or over a general duration of a month. And I would want to be able to group these APIs. What I mean by that is, in the products, you can see I have a basic and an advanced. Now, for each of these APIs, if you see, right, I've stated some APIs to be available only for advanced, and the one where we had just the mock one to be available as as the basic one. So any API on e-commerce would be accessible by somebody that gets a basic subscription from me. But if you want to access OAG, then you need to have or you need to purchase an advanced subscription from me. Let's look at how the access restriction is applied on those places, right? For which we need to get into this concept of developer portal. I'm going to open the developer portal. This will open it to me in the administrator mode, and you can see I can just double click and change. I can edit menu, do a lot of stuff. But I want to open this from a non-administrator mode, meaning as a general user. I have already signed up with my Concentrix ID. Typically, what happens is you would sign up and then you would get that ID, or you would be able to, once you sign up, you will get an email. Upon confirmation of it, you will be able to sign in after that. So once I sign in, if I go to APIs, you can see only e-commerce is what is available to me. I don't have the OAG talks available to me. Why? Because I'm a basic user. How does the system classify me to be a basic user? Once a user signs in, if he has bought only a basic subscription, then you tell that on the users, you tell what is the type that this user is, right? He is added to the developers and he is added to the third party basic access. What is the third party basic access? That's a custom group that I had created, right? It's a custom group created, and for now it has only one member. So once a user adds in, you would have this group as more and more third party basic user access users add in, you would just add them here. How? There are umpteen APIs that are being exposed by which you will be able to add users to this. So once you have them added here, they will only be able to see that specific API from their portal, and you can test those here. I have not provided the subscription key. So if I actually go and provide the subscription key here, I should be able to get the response. You can see here in the developer portal, when I go to that API definition, I can look at the data structure of the response. I can have a default response that is available here. So think of ourselves as a third party developer or a third party company developer who comes here to understand what the API is, what is the structure of the API against which I need to write my code to. This would be a great place for him to start with and for him to try with. Now, to enable this developer access, one common challenge that people run into is that the first time you create the developer portal, you come and access it, you will be presented with a CORS error. Because now when I try it, it is going to do not from a postman, but from a browser that has a specific domain in it. So to enable that on the developer portal, there is a portal overview where you will actually have an option to enable the CORS. So kindly ensure when you are using the developer portal to enable it so that you would be able to access it from there. And two, only those APIs that are published are available on the developer portal to be consumable from there. Those are the two simple restrictions that you have. Also, let's say we are a big business and then we want this to be just within our company. For the developer portal, you can also enable the AD based integration. One question that still lingers around is how did the username based authentication even work in the first place then, right? Because there is this section called identities. By default, when we provision an APIM, we will have identities configured with the username and password provider type. So it is already built in, it is given to us by default. That is how we are able to leverage that form of authentication or basic username and password based authentication in the developer portal. So going back into this, we looked at products, we looked at how they are being used, and we also looked at the fact that if I am not subscribed to a product of a specific pack, I am not even able to use this, right? Now coming back to this, it has caching, content validation. We did see about it. We saw about developer portal. You have a built-in cache, but you can also configure an external cache like Redis just out of the box with no code. When we come here, you have a external cache. You can add your Redis connection string from here, and then that's all that you would have to do to be able to leverage those cache. And once I add it to the cache, I can always go to APIs and I can add a policy to serve it from cache. I can look up it from cache and I can serve it from cache. Let's also look at what analytics, error handling does this do, right? we knew that we integrated all this to one application insights. So one, here you have analytics that says how many requests were done on what time frame, how much was transferred, what was the average request time, all the basic analytics that we get out of any Azure PaaS service as such. We get it out of here as well. If we want to look at errors in particular, we know that we have integrated one application insights for this. So we can always go to that application insights and we would be able to see any errors or failures and performances that we saw. So you can see the number of failures that we had here. These are a bunch of failures that we had when we accessed it because it never reached our backend, right? We tried get playlist and it failed, right? You can see here that it said whatever error that we found there, operation not found, subscription key invalid, all that is being logged. Now, this is all given to me out of the box. There is nothing that we had to do or we had to leverage for it. And from a performance perspective also, you can look at how your APIs have been performing over a period of a certain range. We also looked at integration where we saw that we are able to integrate this to Azure Web App. Of course, in our demo, it did not work out correctly. It did not get the APIs loaded by itself. But the other demo that we see here was also created in the same way. It was able to load it. I am not sure because that network error occurred around that same time if it is related to it. But we are able to integrate it to backend services. We are also able to import it seamlessly from the backend services. Last but not least, the one concept we did not touch about is the versioning concept of it. I don't have a demo for it as is, but I can show you how the versioning is kind of taken care here, assuming that your backend is also versioning compatible. That's the basic underlying concept. If I create a version here and if I don't have a backend that is version compatible, there is nothing much that I can leverage here, right? So if I hit this Sudarsan trial apm.azurewebsites.net /v1/v2, right? I should have a corresponding route associated to it at the backend. So here I can add a version and it will also tell whether it is to be my versioning scheme is on path or I can have a query string or I can put it in a header as to which version of the API I need to use. Once I specify it here, we have NuGet packages, similar NuGet packages. I think it's ASP.NET.versioning, which where you can specify those, and in your backend you will have to build it with that. Then you just tie these two together. So once we have it, we can see that in the developer portal, that versioning will also be available. You can see the other one where I have actually versioned it earlier, and if I go, okay, because that's in OAUG talks, that's why. And this is in e-commerce. Let's try to just do that in a moment. Um, okay, so we are good here. We want to add the user to the advanced group as well. His identity is basic. I can access it as an administrator. Read it. So now I have given access to this advanced product for my third-party basic access users as well. Now, if I go and if I refresh this, you can see I have these two as well available to me for me to look at it and understand those along with the versioning aspects of it. So that pretty much kind of concludes the demo and the presentation as well. Any questions? No, we have used the certificate authority to interact more with just our Azure world or Azure resources.
What are those already trusted?
We had to upload one. We use a DigiCert based certificate that we get. I mean, we purchase it. We You pay it as a per year basis or 5-year basis. What is it?
You had to upload.
Yes, I had to upload the cert authorities. It was not out of the box too. If like just like how when Azure websites.net works, it was not available out of the box like that. In an app service, if I have a custom domain, I had to go and upload the certificate and give the passphrase or key to put it into a certificate store and then link it to my custom domain.
Yeah, but those are public trust. When you do like app services or app services, you can't trust on-prem cert authorities like the manufacturers or services.
Oh yes.
So, like by nature, that doesn't work with the service fault network. You see write code or ignore your SSL check. And so I believe the whole premise of that is like you have your app services or ADI, your PaaS services, call on-prem services through ADIM and upload and trust. I assume the on-prem AD certificate and try that. Yeah, so I'll just get this kind of
No, I haven't tried it. I haven't tried accessing that via this APIM to interact with an on-premise cert. I mean, for our restrictions or our inbuilt restrictions, we had to work with creating a gateway. As we had to establish a site-to-site VPN and then use it via that, not via the APIM gateway. Or I create a site-to-site VPN, and one thing that we can try, we haven't tried it, is put a custom gateway and associate that custom gateway onto that virtual network, which is where the site-to-site VPN is, and then use this gateway to kind of route those requests from my cloud to on-premises. That is CA. Yep. I haven't tried that, but these are the options that we had like explored or tried using site-to-site VPN and gateways. Yeah, no. Thank you. I have used the Redis cache integrated with it rather than its own custom cache. I haven't done a performance testing with it. The reason why we used Redis cache was because apart from the APIs that go via this APIM, we had some, let's call it PHP based legacy APIs and everything where we have introduced Redis cache and we were storing values from there. So we wanted to ensure that there is a synchronized place from where these two systems could operate and leverage some of those data. So we used a Redis cache, but that was pretty much it. So I haven't done a performance study between the integrated cache with this along with the Redis cache. Any questions?
Yes,
All
so
right.
that's some great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Vaibhav.